We don't always know what turns a normal day into a line you can't step back over. Sometimes it's not a fight, not even a voice raised, just one message that lands heavier than it should. Eleanor Whitmore had spent years being the steady one in a family that treated steadiness like it was disposable. She wasn't asking to be admired. She just wanted to stop being rewritten. What happened to her matters because it's the kind of betrayal that doesn't look violent until you realize it's already inside the house. This is the moment she can still name clearly. The key was already between my fingers when my phone buzzed. I was standing in my foyer with my coat on, one shoe fully on and the other half slid at the heel, like I'd been interrupted mid-thought. I'd told myself Jonathan's reconciliation dinner was worth showing up for. My brother liked that word, reconciliation. It sounded clean. It sounded final. The screen lit up with my grandmother's name. Maggie, don't go tonight. He brought papers to me. I didn't sign. Something's wrong. My stomach tightened. I stared at the words, then at my front door, then back at the words like they might change. Another vibration. A call. Thomas Reed. I answered and didn't even manage a greeting. Eleanor. His voice came in low and tight, like he'd stepped into a room that wasn't safe. Listen carefully. My hand stayed on the lock. Don't go to Jonathan's. Don't eat anything he offers. Lock your door. Maggie's with me. We're coming to you. I don't understand. You will? In a few minutes you will? A pause. Then, please, Eleanor. Deadbolt. My throat went dry. He said this was dinner. Just dinner. Eleanor. My name sounded different in his mouth. Not gentle. Precise. They filed for emergency financial conservatorship. The hallway felt smaller, like the air had thickened. That's not, I swallowed. That's not real. It's real enough to get a hearing scheduled. I turned the lock. Once. Then the deadbolt. My fingers didn't feel like they belonged to me. We noticed how she moved on instinct first, and only let herself feel it after the last click. I leaned my forehead against the wood for a second, just breathing through my nose like I could keep everything from spilling out. Thomas. My voice came out thin. Who's they? Jonathan and Claire. Of course. Claire's voice floated in my head before I even heard it. Soft. Concerned. Public. I'm not sick, I said, and it sounded like a plea even though I hated that. I know. He replied. Maggie knows. That's why we're coming. On the counter. My phone buzzed again. A new notification previewed before the screen dimmed. Claire Whitmore is live. I stared at it, then set the phone face down like it could bite. If you feel like it, leave a few words under the video when you're done listening. Sometimes silence is what they count on. Outside. The rain started picking up. Inside. I stood barefoot in my own foyer with the door locked, waiting for the people who still knew my name to show up and prove it. Thomas arrived first. I heard his car before I saw him, tires crunching too loud on wet gravel. Maggie followed in her own sedan, pulling in crooked like she hadn't bothered correcting the wheel. When I opened the door, neither of them hugged me. Thomas stepped inside and set his briefcase on the kitchen table. Maggie stayed standing, her hands wrapped tight around her purse strap. You lock it, Thomas asked. I nodded and turned the deadbolt again anyway. The sound felt louder than it should have. Good, he said. Sit. That word landed wrong. Not unkind. Just firm. The way people talk when they've already decided something needs to be faced head-on. He pulled out a manila folder and slid it toward me. No dramatics. No build-up. What am I looking at? A petition, he said. Filed this afternoon. Maggie exhaled through her nose. I told him I wouldn't sign anything. I told him I didn't understand it. I opened the folder. The paper was heavier than normal printer stock. Clean. Official. My name sat right there, centered like it belonged. Respondent Eleanor Whitmore. My eyes moved faster than my breath. Temporary emergency financial conservatorship. Allegations of erratic decision-making. Missed obligations. diminished capacity following prolonged grief. I let out a short laugh that surprised all three of us. That's not my life. Thomas leaned against the counter. I know. They're saying I can't manage money. My voice stayed steady, which almost scared me more. I pay the property tax. I file everything early. I answer my phone. Maggie stepped closer. You call me every Sunday. You always have. I flipped to the attachments, a list of late filings, a missed meeting with an accountant I'd never heard of, a capacity evaluation signed by a doctor whose name I recognized from Claire's charity events. My stomach dropped. She knows him, I said. Yes, Thomas said, which doesn't make this illegal. It makes it convenient. I pressed my fingers flat on the paper, like it might slide away if I didn't hold it down. This is about the house. Thomas didn't answer right away. Maggie did. It's always been about the house. The room went quiet. The fridge hummed. Rain tapped at the window like it had somewhere better to be. We could hear it then the moment she stopped trying to understand and started organizing the facts instead. I closed the folder. What happens next? There's a hearing scheduled. Thomas said. Soon. They're asking for control of the estate only. Not you. Not yet. Yet. I repeated. Maggie reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her skin felt cold. I knew something was wrong when he rushed me. She said, Your grandfather hated rushing. I swallowed and nodded. My phone buzzed on the counter, screen lighting up face down. I didn't turn it over. Claire's live, Maggie said softly. I saw it before I drove. Thomas straightened. Don't watch it. I slid the phone into a drawer instead. The sound of it hitting the wood felt final. Okay, I said. Then we don't rush either. Thomas met my eyes. Good. I sat there with their faces across from mine, the folder closed but not gone, and understood something I hadn't before. Dinner had never been the point. Thomas stayed at the table. Maggie moved to the counter and started taking papers out of her purse like she'd been waiting for permission all evening. These were in the bottom, she said. I didn't know if they mattered. I picked them up one by one. Old statements, insurance renewals, notes in my grandfather's handwriting, thin and slanted, the way it got when his hands hurt. Thomas leaned in. You've been paying everything on time. I know. He tapped one page. This filing they claim was late. It wasn't. It was submitted early. The confirmation number's right here. My chest tightened. Not panic. Something colder. Maggie nodded. That's what I told Jonathan. He said I was confused. I looked up at her. Did he say that to your face? Yes. She didn't soften it. He smiled when he did. We went through the rest slowly. One supposed missed meeting turned out to be a cancellation initiated from my account at 6 a.m. Another appointment had been moved by half an hour, just enough to make me look careless. I don't remember doing this. I said. Thomas didn't rush to answer. He checked his notes again, then my phone. Your calendar's synced to a family admin account. My brother asked me to set that up, I said. He said it would help. Maggie let out a quiet sound that might have been a sigh. Help always costs you something with him. The room went still. My mouth felt dry. You're saying someone else could have done this? Yes, Thomas said, and not clumsily. Whoever it was knew exactly how much disruption would look believable. I rubbed my forehead. A memory flickered. Jonathan on the phone a few months back. Casual. Almost bored. You've seemed stressed lately. Maybe let me handle a few things. I hadn't argued. I never did. We noticed how she didn't argue now either. She just started stacking the papers into clean piles. I straightened the pages. This isn't about mistakes. No, Thomas said. It's about a pattern. Maggie reached across the counter and pushed another envelope toward me. This one was yellowed, corners soft. Your grandfather left that with me, she said, in case anyone ever forgot why the house mattered. Inside was a letter, Not legal. Personal. He'd written about keeping the place intact, about responsibility not being the same thing as ownership. I closed my eyes for a second. They're trying to make me look unreliable, I said. Not reckless. Just not trustworthy. Thomas met my gaze. Exactly. The clock over the stove clicked over to the next minute. Outside, the rain slowed, then picked up again. I set the letter down and pushed my chair back. Okay, I said. Then we stopped treating this like a misunderstanding. Maggie nodded once. Good, because it isn't one. I didn't feel angry yet, just focused, like something had finally snapped into place, and I could see the shape of what they'd been building around me. I didn't plan to watch the live stream. I told myself I wouldn't, that it would only make things louder in my head. But when Thomas stepped into the other room to take a call and Maggie sat quietly at the table, folding and unfolding the same receipt, my phone felt heavier in my pocket. I pulled it out. Claire was already mid-sentence when the screen filled. She sat on their couch, knees drawn up, a soft throw wrapped around her shoulders like she'd been there a while. No makeup, hair loose. The lighting was warm, careful without looking staged. "We've been getting messages," she said, voice low, steady. "And I just want to say, this isn't something we ever wanted to share." Jonathan sat beside her, hands clasped, eyes down. He didn't look at the camera once. "My sister-in-law, Eleanor," Claire continued. "She's been struggling, and we love her. We've tried to help privately. Tonight was supposed to be a quiet dinner, just family." I felt my jaw tighten. "She wouldn't come," Claire said softly. She locked herself in. And that's when we knew we couldn't keep pretending this wasn't serious. Comments scrolled fast. Hearts. Prayers. "You're doing the right thing," Jonathan finally spoke. "We're not trying to take anything from her. This is about protection. Protection." The word landed flat. Maggie leaned over. "Turn it off," she said. Not unkindly. I didn't yet. Claire's eyes glistened. Right on cue. Sometimes caring for someone means making decisions they don't understand. And that hurts. Especially when people think you're the villain for it. I thought about the folder on my kitchen table. About the way my name looked on official paper when someone else controlled the story. We noticed how the room seemed to shrink around the sound of her voice, even though it was coming from a phone. I locked the screen and set it face down. "That's not anger," Thomas said from the doorway. "That's positioning." Maggie nodded. "She's teaching people how to see you." I swallowed. My throat burned, but my hands stayed steady. "If I say anything," I said. "I look unstable." "Yes," Thomas said. "And if you stay quiet, they'll say silence confirms it." The phone buzzed again. A message from an old neighbor. "Just checking in. Hope you're okay." I slid the phone across the counter, away from me. "Let her talk," I said. "Every word she says is for an audience, not a judge." Maggie reached for my hand. "Your grandfather used to say truth doesn't rush. Lies always do." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "In the other room." Thomas's voice dropped as he spoke into his phone again, clipped and careful. I stared at the dark screen and understood something new. This wasn't about proving I was fine. It was about surviving long enough for the noise to burn itself out. Outside, the rain started again. Slow. Patient. I stayed where I was, listening to the house settle, letting them spend their concern while I kept what mattered quiet. Thomas asked for my phone after midnight. Not abruptly. Just held his hand out like it was the next obvious step. "Unlock it," he said. "Then don't touch anything." I sat across from him while he scrolled. Maggie hovered behind his shoulder, leaning in, then pulling back like she didn't want to crowd the screen. The kitchen light buzzed once, then steadied. "These entries," Thomas said, tapping gently. "You remember scheduling them?" "No." He nodded. "Not surprised. That part matters. He opened the calendar settings, a few swipes, then another menu. Here, he said. Shared access. My name sat at the top. Below it, an admin account labeled Family Assist. That was Jonathan, I said. He set it up after I missed one call with the insurance broker. He said it would make things easier. Maggie let out a breath through her nose. Easier for who? Thomas clicked into the log history. A list appeared. Dates, times, small adjustments. Appointments moved by 10 minutes. Reminders turned off quietly. Notifications rerouted. He didn't delete anything big. Thomas said, "Just enough to make you look sloppy." I stared at the screen. I kept apologizing. I kept telling people I must have forgotten. "You were trained to doubt yourself," he said. "That's the point." Something in my chest went tight and hollow at the same time. Not panic, embarrassment, like realizing you've been speaking with spinach in your teeth and no one told you. Maggie rested her hand on the counter. "You never forgot my birthday," she said. "Not once." I smiled at that, thin but real. Thomas kept scrolling. Here. 2 months ago. An appointment with your accountant moved by half an hour. You arrived late. He documented concern. "I remember that," I said quietly. I remember thinking I was losing my edge. We noticed how she didn't raise her voice, just nodded, like she was filing the thought away for later. Thomas locked the phone and slid it back to me. "This isn't proof yet, but it's a map. A map to what? To who touched what? And when?" The house creaked as the wind shifted. Somewhere down the hall, a pipe knocked once and stopped. I held my phone and felt the weight of it in my palm. Familiar, personal, altered. So every time I blamed myself, I said, "They were watching." "Yes," Thomas said, "and counting on you not wanting to make a scene." Maggie reached across the table and squeezed my wrist. "You always thought being quiet was being kind." I looked at the dark screen and nodded. "Not this time," I said. No one argued. We sat there together, the three of us, letting the silence settle back into place while the picture sharpened. The storm had been building all evening. Not dramatic at first. Just wind worrying the edges of the house. Rain tapping and stopping like it couldn't decide what it wanted. Thomas had stepped out an hour earlier. Maggie was asleep in the guest room. I was on the couch with a blanket pulled up to my chest, phone dark in my hand, when the knocking started. Not polite. Not measured. Hard. Uneven. Too fast. I froze. The sound cut straight through me. Another knock followed, louder, then a fist against the door like whoever it was had run out of patience. I stood up and moved without thinking, bare feet cold against the floor. The porch light was already on. I leaned toward the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. A small shape stood there, soaked through, hair plastered to her face, a backpack hanging off one shoulder like it weighed too much. "Lucy." I unlocked the door and pulled it open. She looked up at me and burst into tears so sudden it startled us both. Rain ran down her cheeks and mixed with it. Her hands shook as she tried to speak. "Aunt Eleanor," she managed, "please, please don't call them." I pulled her inside and shut the door behind us. Locked it. The storm swallowed the porch light again. "It's okay," I said, guiding her toward the kitchen. "Sit. You're freezing." She stood there dripping for a second, then sank into the chair like her legs had finally given up. I grabbed a towel, wrapped it around her shoulders, and set a mug of tea in front of her. She didn't touch it. "They don't know I'm here," she said. "They think I'm at Sarah's." My chest tightened. What happened? She stared at the table. Her voice dropped. "They made me sign something. I didn't interrupt. A statement." She continued. "About you. Mom wrote it. She told me what to say." Her hands clenched in the towel. "She said if I didn't sign it, they'd pull my college fund, that I was being selfish, that you'd take everything from us if I didn't help." I felt something hot rise up and forced it back down. "What did it say?" Lucy swallowed. That you yelled. That you threw things. That I was scared to be around you. She finally looked up then. Her eyes were red and bright and terrified. You didn't. You never did. I know. I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. We noticed how the room went quiet around her words, like even the storm was listening. Lucy reached into her backpack with shaking fingers and pulled out her phone. There's more, she said. Dad left his tablet open. I copied it. I didn't know what else to do. She set the phone on the table and pressed play. Jonathan's voice filled the kitchen, low and rushed. Claire's followed, calm, clipped. We need the order fast, Jonathan said. The developer's already wired $350,000. We can't stall, Claire replied. Once she's not in control, it's done. We just need Lucy to stick to the story. Jonathan again. She's getting soft. Claire's laugh was short. Then we tell people it runs in the family. The recording stopped. Lucy's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know who else to tell. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. It was still cold. You did exactly right, I said. You're safe here. Her breath hitched, then evened out. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against my arm like she'd been holding herself upright for too long. The storm outside grew louder. Inside, everything felt very still. I sat there with my niece clinging to me, her phone on the table between us, and understood that this had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Not for the house. For her. Thomas came back just after 1 a.m. His coat was damp, his hair flattened by rain. Eyes already scanning the room before the door fully closed. Lucy was asleep on the couch, curled into the corner with a blanket pulled up to her chin. Maggie stood near the sink, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking. I slid Lucy's phone across the table. Listen to this, I told him. He didn't sit, just pressed play and leaned in. One hand braced on the chair back. Jonathan's voice filled the kitchen again. The part about the wire, the rush, Claire's calm response, sharp around the edges. Thomas stopped it halfway through. They already took the money. He said, Yes, how much? $350,000. I said. He nodded once. Non-refundable deposit. I'm guessing. From the way they talked, Maggie said. They've spent it. Thomas ran a hand over his face. That explains the timing. I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief. Clarity. This isn't leverage, I said. It's exposure. He finally pulled out a chair and sat. It's both. But you're right about the order. I opened my laptop and slid it toward him. There's more. Contracts. Emails. They didn't hide it well. He scrolled, jaw tightening. Demolition clause within 48 hours of title access. Triple penalties if delivery fails. Maggie let out a soft sound. Your brother never read fine print. He didn't think he had to, I said. Thomas looked up. They needed you declared unfit long enough to move fast. Once the sale closed, the damage would have been permanent. Lucy shifted on the couch, murmured something in her sleep, then went still again. We noticed how the room seemed to hold its breath when her name came up, even though she wasn't awake. Thomas lowered his voice. She can't go back there. I know. I'll call a guardian ad litem in the morning. He said. Quietly? Maggie nodded. Good. I closed the laptop. The click felt final. What's our move? Thomas asked. I didn't answer right away. I watched the rain streak down the window. Slower now. Thicker. The storm was easing, but the house still creaked as if it hadn't been told. We let them think they're ahead. I said, no messages, no statements, no posts. Thomas studied me. You're thinking of agreeing, temporarily, to the conservatorship. Yes. Maggie's eyes searched my face. Eleanor, I won't give them more than they already took. I said, I just won't stop them from stepping where they shouldn't. Thomas leaned back. Considering, there's something else you should know. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin file. Historic preservation records. I ran the address. Maggie smiled, small and certain. Your grandfather hated shortcuts. Thomas met my eyes. This house can't be sold the way they think it can. I felt my pulse slow. Not excitement. Control. Then, I said, we let them finish telling the story they started. Outside, the rain finally softened into a steady hush. Inside, the plan took shape without anyone raising their voice. Thomas spread the documents across my kitchen table like he was laying out a map. Not rushed. Careful. Maggie pulled a chair closer and adjusted her glasses, the way she always did when something mattered. This isn't new, Thomas said, tapping the top page. It's been sitting there for decades. I leaned in. The heading read, Historic Preservation Easement, signed by my grandfather, filed with both the state and federal registries. He did this for tax relief, Maggie said, and because he didn't trust anyone who moved too fast. Thomas nodded. No demolition, no subdivision, no commercial development. Ever. I let the word settle. Ever. They already signed with a developer. I said, they accepted $350,000. Yes, Thomas said, and they promised delivery they legally can't make. Maggie's mouth tightened. Jonathan never asked me about this. He didn't want answers. He wanted signatures. I traced the edge of the paper with my finger. It felt ordinary. Thin. Not dramatic. Just ink and dates and a decision made before I was born. If they move forward, I said. What happens? Thomas didn't hesitate. Federal enforcement, penalties, possible seizure. And because they took the money, knowing or choosing not to know it becomes a fraud issue. I sat back. The chair creaked. Somewhere in the house, Lucy shifted in her sleep. They think this house is an asset, I said. Something to trade. Maggie looked at me. Your grandfather thought of it as a responsibility. We noticed how her voice stayed even when the weight of that responsibility finally landed. Thomas gathered the papers into a neat stack. If you fight now, they slow down. They get careful. And if I don't, they rush, he said, because they're already behind. I pictured Jonathan's face when things went his way. The relief, the confidence, the way he leaned into decisions once he thought he'd won. Okay, I said. Then I won't block it. Maggie studied me. You're sure? I nodded. I'll agree to temporary oversight. Estate only. No statements. No interviews. Thomas watched me closely. They'll think you're folding. Let them. He exhaled. All right. We document everything. Quietly. I stood and walked to the window. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. The street was slick and empty, reflecting the porch light like nothing had happened. Behind me, Maggie folded her hands. Your grandfather would have liked this part, she said. Which part? The waiting. I turned back to the table. The papers sat there, calm and unbothered. They're walking onto protected ground. Thomas said, they just don't know it yet. I thought about the dinner invitation still sitting unanswered in my inbox, about the live stream, about Lucy's shaking hands. Then we let them. I said. No one argued. The house stayed quiet around us, solid and unchanged, while the story they were telling themselves moved closer to its end. The hearing happened on a gray morning that didn't feel important enough to remember. No raised voices, no speeches, just signatures, quiet nods, and a temporary order that gave Jonathan exactly what he thought he wanted. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I sat there with my hands folded and agreed to financial oversight of the estate. Nothing more. Estate only. Limited. Temporary. The words felt small when I said them out loud. Jonathan avoided my eyes. Claire didn't. She watched my face like she was waiting for something to crack. Nothing did. A few days later, The developer's trucks showed up at Whitmore House. Big tires, clean logos, clipboards. By the afternoon, federal agents arrived too. Not dramatic, just efficient. Work stopped. Phones started ringing. By evening, Jonathan was calling me, then texting, then calling again. I didn't answer. Lucy stayed with Maggie. At first, she slept late and ate cereal for dinner and didn't talk much. Then one night, she asked if she could help fold laundry. We stood there together, quiet, the dryer humming, and that felt like enough. Thomas handled the rest. Investigations, letters, the unraveling. I didn't need updates. I could hear it in the way the house finally felt still again. A week later, I signed papers transferring the trust to an independent historical foundation. No ceremony, no audience. I kept nothing extra. I didn't want it. Ownership had never been the part that mattered. On my last morning in Newport, I walked through the house alone, touched the door frames, the banister, the window in the hall where my grandfather used to stand and check the weather. Everything was the same. That was the point. Lucy waited in the car. Maggie hugged me for a long time before letting go. "You did right by it," she said, "and by yourself." I nodded. That was all I had. Driving away felt quieter than I expected. No relief rush, no victory, just space, distance, room to breathe. What I learned wasn't about money or property or winning. It was about the moment I stopped trying to be understood by people who benefited from misunderstanding me. Eleanor Whitmore didn't lose her voice. She chose where to use it. Lucy fell asleep halfway down the highway, her head tipped toward the window. I drove with both hands on the wheel and let the road stretch out. If this story stays with you, you can leave a few words when it ends. Sometimes that's enough. We stayed quiet through the end of her telling, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the stillness felt earned.